In fact, sir, I can visit Lukasz because he's right in Poland, which is very close to Czech Republic.
Yeah.
And
It's
he
not
has some
far.
really nice workshops.
Yeah, correct.
Yes. I am only 7-hour drive from Prague.
Oh,
I see.
great.
7 hours, yeah. And you are right at home, Lukasz? Or...
No, I'm in Scotland.
Ah, in Scotland. Okay.
Yes, I'm in Glasgow at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Lukasz finished his PhD. You heard about that?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Is he continuing scientific work or doing NGO?
I think he's working in he's doing consultation work for Biodiversity International in the People Partnership. And so I think he's he's still doing research. But
What is it? Is it black color actually?
there are still some manuscripts which must be finished. So,
Yeah.
Lucas, so you have a quite some data to publish, but he's quite busy now.
Mm. What is Nishant doing with you?
He's a PhD here.
About what?
We are now working on formulation of the,
Hi, Nancy.
topic.
Hi.
Hello.
Not from Hungary.
Hello, Jolt.
that's-
How are you?
Good. So good to see you, Jolt.
Yeah, you can sit.
Yeah, it's okay. Hello, Jolt. How are you?
I think he has to switch off his in a
It's
mute.
muted.
It's
yeah.
muted. Yes.
Okay, no problem.
Today I met one of your colleagues here. Did Nishant told you?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. He spoke to her.
Oh, good. Just
Yeah.
I met her. She came for a few hours. We had a good
He
conversation.
spoke to her in the afternoon. Your colleague from India. I gave you.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I met her and she
We
had a
spoke to her,
good
yeah.
conversation. She's trying to see what are the aromatic plants are there in India,
Yeah.
which can really benefit the community. That's what I suggested her that 2 points. One was that through the can she link livelihood with the help of the aromatic oils to the community? That's one part I suggested.
Yeah.
She has listed around more than 15 to 20 plants.
Mhm.
And she's going around India and trying to find out these plant species where they are.
Yeah.
And that's one thing she's doing. And then we suggested a few areas. And then also I suggested to be in touch with the National Biodiversity Authority, where your university and the Indian university should apply for the National Biodiversity Authority for getting taking the planting material. She said she'll do it. Yeah, they'll do it. Yeah. I think it was very good concept. Yeah.
Mhm. Maybe there are some other participants.
Yeah.
Maybe too.
I'll accept them.
No, I'm doing it. Yeah.
What's that? Who's Billy? Oh, I had.
So we'll just wait for another 2 minutes, sir, for
Yeah,
all
yeah.
the participants. Yeah.
They're joining. Yeah, I could see that they're joining.
It's going on in room 107 now.
Yeah, let's go. The one who did it's been so
Yeah.
That's-
Okay, that's where you're going.
yeah, that's what I want to go. That's one to sit in.
Okay.
Small request to all the participants to kindly be on mute so that we can hear the speaker clearly. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, you'll be going from there. Right?
Yeah. One. Copy tab.
Karim sir and Dr. Nancy, we have Patrick Quandam, who's the Dean of our faculty, who has joined. Welcome, Patrick. Thank you so much for joining. We have still not
Hello.
begun the program. We will start in 2 minutes. Patrick, can you hear us? I can see he has joined.
Yeah, he's joined. See that.
टीचर छोड़ गया मैंने कम करते हैं मैं ऑनलाइन कंप्यूटर में मारूं मजा आता है
Ishan, I think we can start. Ishan?
Yeah, 1 6, sir. Yeah. Hi, Patrick. You can hear us?
Absolutely, yes.
Yes. Thank you for joining. We have still not started, so I will just start. I'll just start in a minute.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining with us today. I welcome all our participants across the world. So I'm confused whether I should wish you good morning or good evening. So I just want to say hello, a big hello and hi from the Tropical Botany and Ethnobiology Lab, Tribe, Czech Republic, from the Czech University of Life Sciences. And I welcome all of you to the Global Ethnobotany Research webinar series. We've been conducting this for quite some time, and this is the 8th guest lecture, and we are very happy that day by day our participants are increasing, which means the interest of ethnobotany amongst youngsters and researchers across the world is increasing. And the vision of this webinar series is to get all the ethnobotany researchers together in a platform so that youngsters can understand uh, good research work that has been going on in this subject, and we can connect you to many young enthusiasts across the world. So without further ado, I now request Dr. Abdul Karim from the Center for Conservation of Natural Resources to just welcome everyone and talk a little bit about the lab. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nishant. On behalf of the University of Transdisciplinary Health Sciences, Bengaluru, India, I welcome the experts who are here, and also the participants who have from all over the world joined for this webinar. At the different times, as Nishant was mentioning, from morning to afternoon to evening, which different time zone which is there, but still we made it to happen. So on behalf of TDU, I would like to introduce our speaker today, this is Nancy Turner, who is the ethnobotanist, and her research, which she's trying to do, is mostly on integrating botany and ecology with anthropology, geography, and linguistics, which is a major part of the core part of ethnobotany, and also trying to see that documentation has been done on this ethnic knowledge, retained and promote the indigenous communities' knowledge, which she's very, she's done with the entire thing. At the same time, she's very, her effort is mostly on the case of traditional knowledge systems she's trying to do, linking with that of traditional land, and how is the resource management happening in the case of indigenous people, which she's very, her time that she has put on will be interesting if you could hear now when she starts speaking on. And also if you see her research thing, which she has published more than 30 books with 150 book chapters and a lot of research papers with the effort that she has done. And at the same time, she also is involved in the case of narratives and belief systems and ceremonies and different languages which is there. So this is a small background I could give, but a lot to say her about the thing, and I'm sure that we'll be hearing her talk soon. So we are happy that we are also a part, a collaborative with the tribe FTA of Czech Republic jointly, and we're very happy that this endeavor we are trying to do it. And I would like to also say a few words about our university. Nishant, just you can show a small presentation about our university. Yeah, okay. I'm just giving a short summary of what we are doing. Then I think I'll hand over to Nishant on that. Can you able to present that? You are muted. Huh?
Yeah, so just one second.
Yeah, yeah. yeah, I'll just give a few major achievements that the university has done. If you could see that the first that we have established in the country is to on medicinal plant conservation areas across the different states of the country, which has the in situ germplasm of the plants which have been used to by different ethnic communities of the country have been conserved with the proper conservation measures. So around 110 such type of medicinal plant conservation areas have been established with the state forest departments of the country. And the second, which will say that we have also on the process of 23 years or 24 years, we are trying to see that we have computerized the database, which has the herbariums, at the same time, the knowledge of more than 6,000 and odd species of the country, which is having a very clear database on its uses, its distribution, its availability, its names, its local names, vernacular names, which we have tried to do that. And then we also have established a science lab, which shows what the advanced science labs for bridging the local indigenous knowledge with science. A lot of experiments and differences that we have tried to work out and see exactly how it is. And the next also we have now tried to implement, I mean, they have tried to influence the policy where the indigenous knowledge system is also a part of the national policy of the country. And also we have also made a network of all these indigenous communities within the country and of the different states in such a way that they are also in starting from the village level to the state level networks of associations it is there. And also we have tried to document the manuscripts which are lying, which is written in the and more than 10,000 medicinal manuscripts which have been written by different ethnic communities have been cataloged and translated and given to the public. And also with this, I mean, also we have established the different home herbal gardens which can take care of the primary healthcare need for the different ethnic communities of the country. And also we have seen that as a veterinary practice is very important in the country. So there are a lot of knowledge which is available in the case of veterinary science within the different ethnic communities. So we have tried to document it, prioritize a few health conditions that are very common, and entered into action on training this to the veterinary doctors with the different village communities in such a way that they can use the plant care system for veterinary practices. And in the 5-year plan of the government, we have influenced government saying that can we put some funds separately for this to see that the indigenous knowledge has been improved as such. And then on the process of this, we also try to open a hospital, which is an Ayurvedic research hospital, which has again bridging this with the modern science with the Ayurveda as concerned, the traditional science. So this is one thing we did. And then on the process, this has been led to an university, which is the transdisciplinary university. And with not alone that, we're seeing that the nutrition is a major part. So we have a separate department on nutrition, trying to document the holistic knowledge of ethnic knowledge of nutrition and see that we also take this the mainstream of hospitals for the nutrition, hospital foods, and at the same time for hotels can we enter into this. So we are trying to see that the ethnic knowledge has been, is being implemented towards these different groups in such a way that this science of the ethnic knowledge or the indigenous knowledge has been revived and revitalized. So I stop with this, and then I'll let to Nishant. This is something, a summary I thought I'll give you about what we have done.
Dr.
Thank you
Nancy
very much.
Turner.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I kindly request all the participants to be on mute so that we can hear the speaker clearly. The next, I invite Dr. Zbigniew Polesny to just introduce himself and the lab and welcome all the participants on the lab's behalf. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Nishant, very much for invitation. I just would like to welcome all of you on behalf of our lab called the Tropical Botany and Ethnobiology Lab. We are our lab is focused on uh, uh, diversity of the tropical useful plants and their dynamic relationships with traditional knowledge of the
Whenever
local
you need.
people and the environment, and we are focusing on the ethnobotanical, ethnoecological studies of almost entirely in the agroecosystems with relationship to the underutilized crop species and wild useful plants used for food, medicine, and materials. And so in that in that way, we also collect the specimens. We have a we run the herbarium, which is focused on the tropical useful plants, which serves to our students as well as the reference material for research. So if you would like to know more, you can visit our web presentation. It's within the Czech University of Life Sciences website. And so welcome all. I'm very happy to see also my many of my colleagues with those with whom we published some papers and have done some research. So welcome all, and I would like to also invite our dean, Patrick Van Dam, who is somewhere connected in the list. So Patrick, if you hear us, I would like to invite you to say a few words from your side. Thank you very much, and enjoy the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Zbigniew, and hello to all of you, and a warm welcome to the whole audience. It's a pity we can't meet in real life, I would say, that it has to be in distance. Yeah. I'm here in a kind of warehouse because I'm closing shop at the University of Ghent to be able to fully devote myself to the matters that are at hand in Prague. For Nancy, might be interesting for you to know maybe that I'm myself also not only a tropical agronomist, but also an ethnobotanist. Although I've been working much more in the tropics, I saw that you are more active in Canada itself, which of course, as a Canadian citizen is a bit of an advantage. However, I think that we share a lot of common interests. So it's with great expectations that I was looking forward to meeting you through the screen and also to be able to listen to your presentation. I already would like to thank you with this because I think it's always interesting to get these foreign and other perspectives to enlighten us a bit on what we do, our own work in the field. And so I'm very happy that we have you here in this distinguished audience. So with this, I hope I will not bother anyone with the following program or the program as it will evolve. I would like to invite you maybe to start presenting your talk. And thank you for that already.
Thank you so much, Patrick. I'm going to share my screen now.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
And there we are. Can you see it?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Okay. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here with you. Many friends who I've met, some who I've corresponded with over the years, and it's a real privilege and honor to be able to share a little bit of some of the work that I've been doing. And you'll see where this "to get more harvest" quote comes from as I go on. I want to acknowledge all the indigenous and local peoples of the world. These are peoples who have lived in particular places for long periods of time and have cared for those places, looked after them for countless generations. And I'm here in Canada, in Western Canada, in the territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation in the Coast Salish area of Vancouver Island. I want to thank all of the organizers and all of you, all of the participants here. I have many ethnobotanical colleagues, and some of them have already presented at this seminar series. It's really nice to see that. I want to thank my husband, Bob, who's here with me and where we are here, and the organizations that have funded my work. And wild strawberries, of course, one of my favorite fruits. And I especially want to recognize the elders of the First Nations here in Western Canada who've been my teachers, very wise and knowledgeable people. Many of them have passed away now, but I still think of them as being with me, and I can hear their voices and I can see their faces and put myself back to when we were out together on the land. Some people who I'll be talking about, Clan Chief Adam Dick, Quaxistalawatla, passed away a couple of years ago, and his wife, Kimra Kalmakludasi, who gave me permission to quote from him, and Dr. Richard Atleo from the Nuu-chah-nulth Nation is a very dear friend. Dr. Ron Ignace, Chief of the Skeetcheston Nation, and many others. Dr. Mary Thomas I'll be talking about. And I just want to recognize and acknowledge that the knowledge that I'm sharing with you has been generously shared with me over many years. So it's Dr. Daisy Seward Smith, who lives, Mayanil, who's her Kwakwala name. She lives north of us on Vancouver Island. And some years ago, I documented her, interviewed her about traditional management systems, because the peoples here are often called hunter-gatherers, which is, to me, an inaccurate term for what they actually did to tend and care for their lands and their resources. So Daisy talks about that. People think that nature just grows on its own, but our people felt to get more harvest, bigger berries, they did these things like pruning berry bushes and burning. Same thing a farmer does. And how respectful people are of their environment. If you destroy your environment, you're destroying yourself. And there's a website here that highlights the knowledge and the work of Quaxistalawatla, our dear friend, mutual friend, who passed away a couple of years ago. So I'm going to give you an introduction, tell you a few quick stories, talk about environmental knowledge systems, land and resource management, and give you a couple of examples. So here we have a Western red cedar, old growth cedar that years ago, centuries ago, had some bark taken away from it, but the tree is still living up in the territory of the Gitgat Nation. In this area that I'm talking about, northwestern North America, there are about 50 different major indigenous language groups, some of which are related to each other and some of which are isolates, like the Haida language. These peoples have used hundreds of different plants and animals for food, materials, medicine, and they have, their culture is very rich with narrative, ceremony, close relationships with the land. And there's a strong evidence of sharing knowledge across languages and across communities. It's reflected in the names that people give plants and so forth. They've lived in this area along the coast here anyway for 14 to 15,000 years at least. And so there's a high reliance on marine resources along the coast. People are very resilient and resourceful and are really masterful in incorporating new ideas. And I have to stress that these cultures, although they've changed from when the first Europeans arrived here, they're as vibrant and active today as ever. And there's strong programs for language revitalization and renewal of cultural food systems. So here are a couple of maps that just show the diversity. First, on the left of the language groups themselves. And then if you superimpose the same map, on the right are the major vegetation zones. So we have the coastal western hemlock rainforest along the coast, and we have a couple of major mountain ranges, the Coast Mountains and the Rockies and other ranges. In between, we have interior plateau, we have the boreal forest. So there's a lot of diversity in vegetation and biology here. So here's Quaxistalahuatla, and this is the first story. I was sitting with him and he was talking about the tidal marsh root gardens that as a young boy, he would go out to tend with his mother and grandmother, and talked about the root vegetables that they were growing there. That taxus, the glixam, quinine, huquam, these are all native plants that people used to eat the underground parts of. It was all important. And these are the species he's talking about, the silverweed, Potentilla, ageti, Nootka lupin, the northern rice root, Fritillaria camsitensis, and the springbank clover, Trifolium wormsioldii. And then he started talking about something I had never heard before. He said, that was my job when he was about 9 years old, to pick them off. And he's talking about the rice root, huquam. That was my job, to pick them off on the bottom. It's called the gagump. And gagump means grandfather. And then they told me to throw that in the garden. And he described this part of the rice root that I didn't know what he was talking about. But later on, when we went there and he showed me, I could see it was a rather large sprout, a portion of the bulb of the rice root that he was talking about, that as a child, he was taught to put them back in the ground. I said, Adam, is that going to grow into a new plant? And he said, yes, that's why we did it. So here are the gagum, the little sprouts that he would break off and put back into the ground. And they did it to replenish and to maintain the rice root. And the same year, I was up in the interior working with Dr. Mary Thomas of the Shwetmuk Nation, Shuswap. And then she was talking about how when she was out digging roots with her grandmother and her mother, they would take the shwi, the yellow glacier lily, erythronium, and we buried back the little ones in the ground. We took there's a little part at the bottom, they called it the whiskers, and you had to clip that off and put it back in the ground so it would grow back again. I thought, wow, this is something I've never heard before. People actually replanting the propagules of these perennial root vegetable species. And then a few years after that, I was with Cyril Carpenter of the Heiltsuk Nation in the Central Coast. And he told me about how his grandmother described these berry gardens that they used to, they created next to waterfalls on south-facing slopes in the forest. And they would fertilize these areas with fish remains and ash from the fire and clam shells. And they transplanted berry bushes to these sites. And she said, you could pull the berries off by the handful. And then my friend Pauline Waterfall, whose grandmother was related to Cyril's grandmother, told me the same thing. So this is a different way of looking at how people actually obtained their food in this region. And we went back with Pauline and my friend Jennifer, Cyril's widow, and others, and we looked for those berry gardens, and we think we found them, but we have to remember that that would have been about 80 years ago when they were actually gardening with these berry gardens. And so just to step back, our mutual friend, some of you know Fikret Berkes, who wrote Sacred Ecology, now in its 4th edition, talking about Indigenous knowledge. A cumulative body of knowledge, practice, and belief, evolving by adaptive processes and handed down through generations by cultural transmission. And if we look over on the right, you see cultural transmission happening here with my friend Helen Clifton, who turned 96 yesterday up in the Kit Kat Nation, and her little granddaughter Janelle. And they're just working together, and Janelle's practicing what her grandma's doing, pounding the dried halibut with a yew wood mallet. Sorry, I couldn't hear that. So these are different components of Indigenous knowledge systems. There's all the practical knowledge about the species, where they grow, when they're ready to harvest, how to process them. But there's also an underlying value system, worldview, beliefs of respect and gratitude and reciprocity. There's ways of teaching and communicating information through language and stories and ceremony. The land and resource management systems are a component of this, and governance institutions, decisions, planning, how you are going to use the land, who's going to go, who's responsible, and that kind of thing, all enacted in a cyclical time frame, going way back over generations. There's my friend, Dr. Richard Atleo Umik, who is the hereditary chief responsible for the Atleo River Valley on the west coast of Vancouver Island and New Channel Territory. And the knowledge is based on generations of observation, observing animals and how when the grizzly bears scatter the rice root when they dig it, they leave little propagules behind, and those are going to grow up into new plants. How the black bear scatters the huckleberries as it eats, and how the huckleberries get spread around by the animals. And so people do the same thing. They take a handful of berries when they're picking berries and throw it over their shoulder to increase the numbers of berry bushes. They see how the willow sprouts into long withes after the beaver cuts the main branch. And they use that to get materials for their baskets and so forth. And women's knowledge, women are often overlooked, but they are the ones that have been largely responsible for the harvesting and care of the plant foods in particular. Also the basket makers and the harvesters of the bark and other fibrous materials for making baskets and mats. And so this particular part of plant use has often been overlooked because the early ethnographers and archaeologists were men, and they taught to men mainly. And we see that knowledge is embedded in the belief systems. For example, in the Ntlakatmuch, recorded by James Tate, that flowers, plants, and grass, especially the latter, are the covering or blanket of the earth. If too much plucked or ruthlessly destroyed, the earth is sorry, weeps, and it rains and makes rain, fog, and bad weather. This is an overarching teaching that you never wantonly destroy the vegetation. It's really, really important, and it's the earth's blanket, the hair of the earth. And there are lots of stories. This one is one about how Raven brought soapberries to the Bellacoola Valley. And there's all kinds of other stories that explain people's knowledge about plants. I'm sorry I don't have time to go into these, but I do want to get through my talk. Adam Dick, Quaxistalawatla, taught us a word that means keeping it living. And that's the word that they apply when they're talking about harvesting plants, that you harvest living perennial species and you intentionally keep them alive at the same time. And this is what we've come to recognize as perennial cultivation in this region, an area that was formerly called a place of hunter-gatherers only. And there are many different ways that people keep it living. Selective and partial harvesting, like I've talked about, tilling and weeding, fertilizing, pruning and coppicing berry bushes, transplanting and replanting propagules, using fire and clearing areas to maintain different successional stages of forest growth, terracing and building dikes and so forth. And the social aspects, ownership and proprietorship, which doesn't mean ownership in the sense that is in the legal sense, but rather it's the individual or the family that has the responsibility over looking after an area or a resource, training and education, and multi-generational monitoring. All of these are aspects of keeping it living. And my friend Mary Thomas, Dr. Mary Thomas, who passed away in 2003, but she was a basket maker with birch bark and other materials. And she talks about how you have to be so careful when you're harvesting birch bark. You don't cut through the thin pulp down to the growing layer of the tree. If you cut right through, the sap will start to come out and you deprive the tree of the sap. So she knew the technique of just cutting the outer part of the birch bark and keeping the tree alive. And as I mentioned, ownership is part of management, and it's not just common property that anyone can go and help themselves. All of the lands and the waters were very carefully overseen by individuals, by communities, and they were very careful. That it wasn't that they wouldn't allow other people to come, but you have to ask permission if you want to go and harvest in someone's area.
Doctor, Poden doctor.
Yes.
Poden तो आइए
बीमार
बड़ी प्यारी है.
Sorry. And so management goes hand in hand. You don't just use the resources, but you care for them. And this goes back to some of the early writing. This is from Edward Curtis in 1915. A standing tree from which boards have been split is called kitog, begged from, said that the trees are believed to have sentient life. And so you have to come and ask a tree if you want to harvest from it. We hope you will let us have a piece of you. The same request is made of a yew tree before cutting off for making tools. And similarly, Franz Boas, who many of you will know of, a famous ethnographer who wrote a lot about the Kwakwaka'wakw in particular. They do not take all of the cedar bark, for the people of the olden times said if they peel off the cedar bark, the young cedar would die. Then another cedar tree nearby would curse the bark peeler so that he would also die. So the bark peeler never takes off all the bark from a young tree. You just take one strip. And you can see, as I said before, in the old trees that are still living, you can see evidence of people's careful removal of just partial part of the bark, either for roofing or for basketry. In the production of root vegetables, as I've already talked about a little bit, there was ownership. People burned over to maintain the habitat. They harvested when the plants were going to seed so that they would they would scatter the seed while they were harvesting. They would replant the propagules, as I've talked about, and they often had a first root ceremony to recognize and respect the roots that they were harvesting. Trade and exchange, stories and teaching, all of this is part of this production. For example, we have 2 species of Camassia here that were staple root vegetables for the local people here on Vancouver Island, the Salishan people especially. They have to be pit cooked because their main carbohydrate is inulin, and it needs a long, slow, low-level cooking to convert inulin into fructose. But these bulbs were harvested by the millions on Vancouver Island, and the prairies where the camas grows were maintained by burning. So, and people were oversaw the harvesting and the burning of the camas patches. People with special knowledge took on that responsibility. And people owned particular camas patches. There's work from the late Wayne Suttles, a very well-known ethnographer here, who talks about how women owned these patches and would defend them. And then they were passed on when that person died onto another person. And if you cultivate these bulbs, they grow amazingly well. And my friend and former doctoral student, Brenda Beckwith, did experimental tending of camas bulbs. And these are the size of the bulbs that she was able to obtain after about 3 or 4 years of careful tending and weeding and thinning. You can see here, these are all the camas bulbs that were found in 1 square meter of ground. And you can see that we've organized them by age. So the 1-year-old bulbs are up at the top, the 2-year-old bulbs, and then the 3 and 4-year-old bulbs extend their length and they drill down into the ground. And so they're much deeper by the time they get to 5, 6, 7 years old when they're ready to harvest. So you dig around, you take the top layer of turf that contains the small bulbs and flip it over. This is when the plants have gone to seed. You pick out the biggest bulbs, you weed the grasses out, you flip it back over, the seeds are released into the soil, and then you give a quick burn to the whole thing. And that's how they kept these camas prairies living and thriving for thousands of years. The digging stick is a perfect tool, and I have one here. I'll show you after if I have a chance. But you actually use it as a lever rather than cutting through the soil. You dig down around it and you pry the soil up, and that keeps the roots intact when you're digging. We know that these digging sticks have been used for thousands of years. There's Quaxistala back to the tidal marsh garden. He talks about how people put ownership to these little root gardens that they made. They used little pegs. This is my area. You had your own pegs down in the flats, and you continued digging the soft earth, fertilizing, cultivating. I guess that's the word for it. Every family had pegs, owned their little plots and flats. And we see from France Boas's work and my friend Doug Duer, how people divided up the tidal marsh gardens into these family plots. And we've tried to, we've experimented with the propagules, with the gogump, and with the little bulblets of the rice root. And sure enough, they grow into new plants readily. And one bulb, one handful, had 107 propagules. So you can easily maintain these if you're careful and if you know what you're doing. And the roots were transplanted. We know my friend Margaret Sywallis, when she was a young woman, she and her husband brought them to the Kitlope Valley, a watershed to the north of Bella Coola. And I was up there and saw them growing in the 1990s. And we know that people transplanted the tubers of Wapato, for example, at the head of Sturgeon Slough, and they looked after the Wapato, the Sagittaria tubers, and attended them in gardens in the same way. And guess what? Archaeologists discovered a 38 100-year-old Wapato, pure Wapato plot that had been covered up, and it was interspersed with digging stick tips. So we know that this was a human created patch with almost pure Wapato. And there's some nice papers written about this now from the Fraser Valley. Onions were also tended. And after a fire, the onions will grow to 1 meter or more high, as I saw up in the interior. The mountain potato is another root vegetable that people looked after and harvested. But because they haven't been allowed to burn, one of the elders said, now they're only that big, they're tiny like marbles instead of big like walnuts, the way they used to be. And the Tsilhqot'in people in the southern interior, an Athabascan speaking group, had a special ceremony for women who lost their husbands and were grieving. And they told them to go up to the mountains and pull up the old mountain potato plants and throw them into areas where they're not growing. And that will help you to get over your grief. And we were up there and we pulled some of these old plants and I put them in an envelope. Sure enough, about 2 weeks later, when I opened the envelope, there are these little black seeds and we planted them out. Sure enough, they grow into new plants. So the Tsilhqot'in people say, we're the ones responsible for these extensive patches of mountain potato in the mountains that are called Potato Mountains, Claytonia, Lanciolara. Berry production the same, many types of berries. I've already talked about the berry gardens, but people tend the berry bushes and berry patches using fire, using pruning and so forth. Many different kinds of fruits, maybe 50 different species that are coppiced, burned, pruned, and patches owned by individuals. It's so important to the use of fire, and because fire has been prohibited, the use of landscape burning since the early 1900s, the forests have all grown up and become too bushy, and the berries are much fewer than they used to be, according to the elders. And we also have these catastrophic wildfires that have burned through areas that would have been maintained earlier by just small ground fires. They'd burn every 5 or 6 years, my friend Sam Mitchell said. It's only timber grows now. They burned the Lillooet to make raspberries, and west of Lillooet for the huckleberries. And my friend Annie York from the Katmuk Nation, they wait until close to fall. They know when to burn. Then 2 or 3 years after, lots of huckleberries, lots of blueberries, and the scammets. That's the same as the shwee that Mary was harvesting, the erythronium. When it grows when you burn. I've seen it when the old people used to do it. And they break the branches off, Adam said. We tehuided, we break off the branches so the berries will grow. A lot of people think we never touched the wild berries. We did. We cultivated it, we pruned it, especially the guadams, the red huckleberry. And everyone had their own berry patches, like everyone had their own clam beds, salal patches, yeah, salmon berries, all kinds of berries. You don't just go out and pick in someone's place. And all of these fruits had this similar kinds of treatments, pruning, transplanting, and the use not just of the berries, but of the withes and the wood for the hazelnuts and the crabapple and so forth, and Saskatoon berry, Emma Lankier. The late Emma Nice talked about her grandmother who was blind, and she loved picking berries. So her grandfather transplanted all kinds of berry bushes into their yard in the Nass Valley in the north, and they're still growing there today. People used to do that all the time, she said. And so those are some of the ways that plants are managed, but also clams and other shellfish and salmon were also managed similarly. They were transplanted, they were carefully tended, they were selectively harvested, all of these things to maintain optimal productivity. And we have places where we can see, and there's a website you might enjoy visiting in the Heiltsuk territory that my friend Dr. Dana Lepovsky and the Heiltsuk Nation have put together about an amazing place that reflects all of these management strategies from the below the tide line in the ocean right up to the mountain peaks. All kinds of different habitats were maintained by the Heiltsuk Nation. There are culturally modified cedar trees, there are crabapple groves, gooseberries like you wouldn't believe, stingy nettle, huge plants of stingy nettle, berry bushes galore. And similarly up in off the Skeena River, the Kitsim-Kalem River is a place called Robintown, where there are gardens that have all of these culturally important shrubs and other plants, rice root, crabapple, that they say people brought them, those plants here, and planted them in an old village site there. You can still see them today. The Europeans did not recognize the tending that went on or the cultivation that people had, and just assumed they made no real use of their land at all. And so they made these tiny reserves and made people live on them next to the ocean so they could go out and fish for salmon, but they had no recognition of the plant resources that they needed. And so their lands were taken away. And we see this over and over again in the writing of the time. In 1868, Gilbert Sprout wrote, "Any right in the soil which these natives had as occupiers was partial and imperfect, as with the exception of hunting animals in the forests, plucking wild fruits and cutting a few trees to make canoes and houses, the natives did not in any civilized sense occupy the land." So that's rather ironic to think of how we treat the land today and how badly we've allowed it to deteriorate. These practices are as important today as they were ever in the past. A lot of the knowledge, the detailed knowledge about how people burned or how they pruned and coppiced has been forgotten, but because people haven't been able to go out on the land and practice these tending practices anymore. But people are relearning them, and we look at the past accounts, and there's experimental tending going on everywhere. Experimentation, like I hear from Dr. Karim, that they're doing in India and elsewhere, is going on here as well. So we're relearning together a lot of this wisdom and knowledge from the past. These management practices and associated knowledge are as relevant today as in the past. With respectful collaboration, they have excellent potential for wide application in ecological restoration and food production, permaculture, and biodiversity conservation, and to help us to reduce climate change and adapt to climate change. And I know many of you out there are working in these areas in different parts of the world. And I really feel like we're all in a big circle, a big team working together to try to restore the integrity of the earth in different places, and to recognize the people who hold that knowledge. So thank you very much for listening. I have at the end a few references about what I've been talking about. There's my friend Doug Doer, who has done a lot of this work. Dana Lepovsky, who's been a really important member of the Society for Ethnobiology. And what I just wanted to mention that there's a new book out now with my dear friend Dr. Listeam Arvid Charlie from the Cowichan Nation. He's a very knowledgeable botanist, and this book is about his plant knowledge. So with that, thank you very much. And there might be time for 1 or 2 questions. I'd be happy to try and answer. I wanted to show you. I wanted to show you the.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah, okay. This is the harvesting tool. Okay.
Yeah, this is the digging stick made out of yew wood.
Okay. That looks really nice. I'm sure it's much more fun to harvest with this tool.
It is. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Nancy, thank you so much for that wonderful talk. I must say that your talk reminds me of a very old Ayurvedic shloka in which they acknowledge the local communities about having the source of traditional knowledge. Of course, all of us study ethnobotany every day. We have interesting papers coming out, but the source is the local communities. And I was so happy that almost every slide of yours was an acknowledgement to the hard-earned efforts of the local communities that you've been interacting with, and such a lovely thing to acknowledge them as well. We do have some time for questions, if you don't mind, if I can take some 1 or 2 questions. First, I can ask the participants themselves to ask the question directly by unmuting themselves, and or put out the question in the chat box. Anything is fine. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, Zolt, you can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Nancy. It was lovely. It's always inspiring to listen to you. And since 2010, when I first heard about these traditional perennial cultivation practices, I'm looking for them in Europe and Asia. But very, very few is written about this in our continent. So do you know any examples from Siberia or Central Asia or prehistorical Europe that was really published on these tending the wild and gardening berries and other root vegetables in nature?
Oh, thank you for that question, Solt. And it's so good to have you here and to spend some time with you through this medium. I need to give it some thought. It's not something that comes immediately to mind. I can think of a few papers that might have something. I know in Sweden, some of you might know Lars
Östlund.
Ostlund, thank you.
Yes.
My brain stopped for a minute. I was in Sweden with him, and we went up in the snow to an area where the Sami people had been harvesting the bark of the Scots pine. And honestly, the way they harvest that is identical to the way the Tsukotin and other people harvest the lodgepole pine here in Canada. And they cut a rectangular square from the bark and lift the bark off and then scrape the inner bark, which is a really delicious food. And so the Sami people were doing the same thing, partial harvesting of the bark. So there's a bit written about that from Lars and his students on culturally modified trees. And we've done a little bit, we co-wrote a paper together with some of you on culturally modified trees in the world and how people have used perennial woody species without killing the trees in many parts of the world. As for the use of fire, I think that's also been used in Siberia and elsewhere, but I can't come to any immediate papers about that.
I still don't know whether the wild apple in Europe, Malus sylvestris, is native to Central Europe or was brought here by Paleolithic people from the south, from the east. So many of these wild edible plants and fruits might not be native to that local area or not even to the region, but transported by migrating people. So there's a huge body of non-evidenced stories in the European and Siberian history. Thank you, Nancy, for
I just wanted to mention that the apple that we have here, the Pacific crabapple Malus fusca, is most closely related genetically to the apple found in Japan and Eastern Asia, not to the apple found in the Eastern North America. And it seems that it's been here for about 10,000 years, according to genetic studies. So it's possible too that the Pacific crabapple was actually brought over from Asia by people migrating across.
Thank you. That's great. That's great. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Lukasz, I can see you've raised your hand. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Yes. Again, thank you for a wonderful talk. But I also wanted to ask something that was mentioned before about the harvesting of inner bark. How long was the period of harvesting this bark, and how was it in relation to saps? Was it harvested in the same season when the saps were flowing, or later, or much later? That's my one question. And second question is, until when the indigenous groups in the area you studied harvested ferns? When this whole, because you wrote a lot about harvesting in your papers about harvesting Dryopteris and Pteridium, and when did the practice actually stop?
Oh, those are great questions. So the inner bark of the pines, people use different species on the coast, western hemlock, tsuga, and amabilis fir, abes, and spruce. And they harvested in general, and then in the interior, ponderosa pine and lodgepole pine, both. They harvested it when the sap was running in the late spring, usually, and they often used phenological indicators like the blooming of a particular plant. When that plant starts blooming, they know it's time to go and harvest the inner bark of the pine or the hemlock. So they would test it ahead of time, and I could send you, Lukasz. We had a student who studied the pine bark harvesting, and she wrote a paper about it, and I could send that to you if you'd like.
Okay.
And then the Dryopteris, I spoke to people like Helen Clifton, who's 96 now, and up in Hartley Bay. They loved that fern, the fern roots, but it was only about, so it would be the grandparent generation of the current grandparent generation, where people remembered, my grandfather loved that root, and they put it in an underground pit and they cooked it in the winter time. So I have that sort of, it would be like 4 generations back when people were actually actively harvesting that. And as for the bracken, most people don't remember, the people that I've talked to, even back in the 60s, the grandparent generation, didn't remember harvesting bracken fern. So you go back in the literature, and there's a paper written by Helen Norton about bracken that I'd be happy to send you as well. But the use of bracken fern goes way back, and it was stopped mostly around the time that potatoes were introduced, as far as I can tell, which would be at the beginning of the European entry into this area.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I can see Carter has raised hand. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Turner. Thank you very much for the presentation. I was just wondering, kind of you mentioned at the end that part of kind of reinvigorating these traditional practices is by engaging with, like by doing this research and engaging with reciprocity and collaboration. And I noticed that you talked a bit about the ways that you would do that in carrying out the research. But I was wondering if you would maybe talk a little bit about when you were, like how you would go about being collaborative and reciprocal in your relationships with these elders that you would work with in the designing of the research, and then like what you would do with it, kind of how you would go about turning it into, I guess, empowerment or positive effects, you know, yeah.
Thank you. A lot has changed since I started doing work in the late 60s, when there were no requirements through research ethics or anything like that. And as a researcher, I just had to rely on my own, I guess, instincts about the fairness and participatory reciprocity in that way, giving back. How can I use my knowledge of plants to help people? And mostly it was developing personal relationships and then asking advice from them. And a lot of the people that I have worked with have back in that day, I was told, you know, you better record everything because it'll all be gone in 10 years. And this is what the elders were afraid of, that the knowledge that they held and the experiences that they held would not be, would be lost, would be gone, and that they wouldn't be available for their grandchildren or their great grandchildren, because their own children at that time were suffering from the effects of residential schools, and we're engaged in the wage economy and in jobs, and we're often really busy. And the elders could see that what they knew, they weren't getting asked about it. And so it was really a close partnership right from the start, developed with many, many different people who have all been really dear friends, and thinking about how I can use my knowledge and my abilities for writing and whatever, to make sure that what they knew isn't lost. And that's more or less what's happened all along, but there's been an amazing revitalization of knowledge, resurgence of knowledge. I often work with linguists. I'm not a linguist myself, but there's a three-way collaboration that can work really well between knowledge holders and knowledge holding communities, linguists who can write down the words in linguistic jargon and help record them, and then a botanist like myself who can provide the plant identification for the plants that people are talking about, and then going together to make a museum exhibit or a book or a video or any number of ways of ensuring that the information properly attributed is shared, especially with the families and the younger generations in schools or in any other way, so that it won't be forgotten and that it can be part of the revitalization process. There's so much more I could say about it, but I hope that helps a little.
Are there any other questions? Well, since there's no question, I would take this opportunity to ask my a small question that I have, and it could be probably a good way to conclude the talk as well. Well, now, you just said that there's this 96-year-old researcher of yours, and we all know that one day, one by one, every local community is going to pass away and ethnobotanical knowledge is going to go away. So, and this particular time where modern technology and there's so many things happening, there are a lot of youngsters who want to do some interesting research on ethnobotany, but they don't know which aspect, because we have less time and there's a lot to cover, and sometimes we need to prioritize a few things before. So what is your advice to youngsters who want to do research on ethnobotany, and which part can they focus more on, and how should they go about? Yeah.
That's a really good question. Thank you very much. My head is just spinning when I start thinking about, well, which part is more important, because it's so interconnected. The knowledge about looking after the plants, along with the language and the terms and the actual, I guess, experimental work to try and simulate or emulate past practices, and to see how they can be brought back in a way that promotes both the cultural integrity and ecological integrity. And nowadays, when we're all facing climate change, I think directing our focus on how the knowledge of local peoples.
Another 5 minutes, sir. We are going to end now.
Okay, I'm just about finished. How the knowledge of local people can be applied and used in a way that is that conserves the species, local indigenous species, and also helps to conserve and promote the knowledge and highlight the knowledge of local and indigenous peoples, because Western science has been very powerful in many ways, but it hasn't. Western scientists alone have not been able to prevent what's happening in the world in terms of the deterioration of landscapes and species loss and biodiversity loss and climate change. We need all kinds of different ideas and different ways of contributing to and different value systems, I would say, that are embedded in indigenous knowledge systems. What's the most important in the world? The other species around us, and not our own acquisitions of wealth and so forth. So that doesn't really answer the question about what people should study, because there's so many different ways of approaching this question. But I would say that looking into ways that First Peoples have of looking after their lands and maintaining the species numbers, and in the face of, and how they've adapted over time as well. I think those are very important areas that we can all learn from. And we have to make sure, as someone has implied from previous questions, that the First Nations, Indigenous peoples and local peoples do not get left behind, and are the ones that are who are recognized and who receive benefits, not necessarily financial benefits, but benefits to their lives from their generosity and sharing knowledge with the rest of us. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for wonderfully answering that. So since we've short time for 15 minutes, I hope that's fine. But thank you so much again for this wonderful talk. I'm sure that participants across the world have certainly touched that ethnobotanical reasoning that they always wanted to. So I now request all the participants to come on video so that we can take a small group picture. That's the least we could do to just come together and have a small picture. So till everyone comes, I request Dr. Karim also to convey his gratitude. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you. It was really very, very good. And sure, I think the perspective of the other side of the country is really helping us to think on that. Maybe one point I would like to add on is that that in India also, the sustainable collection practices, the indigenous knowledge people who have is tremendous. And when we see on, especially the fruit, the bark, the season, the type of berries that they need to take, when to take, what size to take, is really for different species on different indigenous people in different parts of the country is so good that we are trying to record this, document this, and in turn train the next generation people in such a way that they continue this knowledge. I thought I'll inform you. So it's it's a very important topic which our country is trying to work on it. Let's see our best and come out with good sustainable harvest protocols for some indigenous species which are from the wild. Yeah, thank you very much. It has really given us a good initiative and I mean a different type of thinking on especially the tools that has been used, which you showed, and all these things. Yeah, we'll see that. We'll also discuss within our team and see that how will we take this forward and do this. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Karim. Thank you.
Yeah, so we'll take the group picture at the count of 3. So you can keep all your smiles ready so that I can take it. 1, 2, and 3. I'm just gonna turn the laptop. We have some colleagues in the classroom and cover them. You can come.
Oh.
Yeah. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. And thank you so much, especially Dr. Nancy, because when you joined, it was twilight and now there's sunshine in your background. So we can see how early you got up for this talk.
You can see where I am now.
Really beautiful. Thank you so much again for taking out your time. And a lot of people have conveyed their excitement and how happy they are to attend your talk. So you've put a lot of people, a smile on a lot of people's faces as they fall asleep, and maybe they have ethnobotanical dreams today. That's the target of our talk. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Thank you so much. And I will be sharing the recording of the talk to all the participants. So if you missed something, you can go back and listen to Nancy again. And I wish, Nancy, you have a wonderful day ahead. And wherever everyone is, I request all of you to take care of yourselves during this pandemic. Let's be safe. And I wish you all a good time ahead. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Nishant. Yeah.
Thank you, all of you. Bye-bye.
Bye.